Hello everyone, Stepan here, welcome to Hanging Pawns. I'm going to analyze the first game of the World Chess Championship played today. It finished just 2 hours ago, maybe even less than that. And it lasted for 7 hours. And I actually watched the game live for about 3 or 4 hours. And then just when it seemed that it's about to end, something unexpected happened and I stopped watching and went out for a beer, and I just got back. So I actually didn't expect the game to last this long, nor the result to be as it was in the end. And I have to say I was very excited to watch the game. I was excited with how the game went, and I'm sorry with how it finished. So I don't know how familiar you are with the regulations of the tournament. Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana will be playing 12 games. First one to reach 6.5 will be declared winner. In case of a tie, they are going to be playing rapid tie-break games, and then if that's indecisive as well, they're going to play blitz. And then in the end, they're going to play an Armageddon game in which black wins with a draw as well. But let's hope that that's not going to happen. Last time, in 2016, when Magnus was playing Sergei Karyakin, they actually had a tie and Magnus won in the tie breaks. So, two highest rated players in the world, 28-35, I think Magnus Carlsen's rating is exactly that right now, and Caruana is just a few points behind him. So, a very tight match, and I'm not sure who my favorite is. I was just discussing that with a friend today. I think I would prefer Caruana to win, even though I think Magnus is a better player, because I'd like to get a new world champion. But yeah, let the better man win. And of course, it must have been very stressful for them. I can just imagine the anticipation 6 months or 7 months after the candidates, what you have to go through before the match, and when the day finally comes. You are Fabiano Caruana, you have the white pieces, you opened with pawn to e4, and Magnus Carlsen plays c5. And of course, every opening is in Carlsen's repertoire. I just don't think that anybody expected him to play the Sicilian in round 1, and it went well. So, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, the Rossolimo attack by Fabiano Caruana, which is one of the most solid approaches white could take. It basically dampens black's aggression in the Sicilian, and it's a solid opening choice for white. I have linked the video on the theory of the Rossolimo attack in the description below. You can check that out as well. And by the way, this game lasted for 7 hours and for over 100 moves, so I have to say this is probably one of the longest games I've ever seen in World Championship cycles, at least the newer ones, and it was a very exciting game. So g6, the main move, bishop takes c6. Now you could take with the b-pawn or with the d-pawn. It's more common to take with the d-pawn, so d takes c6, d3, bishop to g7, this is all very common theory. Pawn to h3, just not allowing black to pin the knight on f3. Knight to f6, knight to c3, knight to d7. This is, this is not the main move, but it's quite common. Now bishop to e3, e5, the main move. And here, white or Caruana actually was the first one to get out of mainline theory. The main move here is queen to d2, preparing to exchange the bishops on h6, after which black plays h6 to stop that. But instead of that, after e5, Fabiano Caruana castled, which I'm not sure was his preparation, because how can you prepare for the Rossolimo attack in the first game of the World Championship match? I think this is just something he had prepared before. And to this, Magnus Carlsen reacted with b6. Now here, the most common move in this position after castles is queen to e7, which is perhaps more sensible, putting more defense to the c5 pawn, but b6 is doing the same thing. And here, knight to h2 by Fabiano Caruana, preparing the pawn to f4 push, just a pawn break on the king side, which is probably the most sensible thing to do. And this is a very common plan in closed Sicilians, especially in the Grand Prix attack, in which you play that immediately. You want your knight to return to f3 after the pawn has moved to f4, or you want to put the knight on g4. But basically you want to free up space for this pawn to advance. And now Magnus Carlsen played the first novelty of the game, and I think he must have prepared this for the match, and I think it's actually a very exciting novelty, even though it doesn't look that much. The move is knight to f8. Now the move has a clear purpose. He wants to get the knight to the d4 square or blockade the f4 square. But anyway, the knight is rerouting to a much more useful square. Now if you count the tempi, this was knight from g8 to f6, then to d7, then to f8, then to e6, and then finally to d4. So a lot of moves to remaneuver your knight, but since it's a closed position, it's not like the knight or for the dragon, in which every tempo counts. You have actually time to maneuver here. Now f4, the pawn break, e takes f4, rook takes f4. Well, it's better to take with the rook. I think now you are giving a tempo to black, but you're giving black a tempo anyway if you take with the bishop as well. Now he had two options which he didn't play. One is bishop to h6, but then after rook to f3 you have to be prepared to exchange the bishops, which is definitely not in black's favor because your bishop on g7 is your most important defensive piece. And another move that must have been considered was knight to e6, chasing the rook away, and after rook to f2, knight to d4. And this knight actually has a marvelous outpost here on d4, is defended twice, and it can never be captured. If white allows this, then I think black is just better in this position, and so this shouldn't be played. So knight f6, knight to d4. Now white would have to play, Caruana would have to play queen to d2, and after bishop to e6 the position would be normal, but I think this knight would be by far the best minor piece on the board. However, after rook takes f4, Magnus Carlsen played bishop to e6, perhaps trying to castle queenside, and Caruana moved the rook in advance, so rook to f2. Now we have h6, queen to d2, attacking h6, and g5. A very aggressive plan, but another idea this knight has, it doesn't have to go to e6, which was perhaps planned at first. Another great square is g6, from which you are controlling e5 and f4, and of course h4, which is less relevant. But a great plan by Magnus, and I think this has never been played in the Rossolimo Attack, and this might be a completely new idea. Caruana doubles up his rooks, rook a to f1, queen to d6, activating the queen, and now knight to g4. And I was trying to make one idea work, and when I was watching the live broadcast, the commentators were talking about that as well. And that's a clearance move, a pawn sacrifice, which would clear up the e4 square. Of course, in this position it doesn't work, but after Caruana's move, knight to g4, it actually would work. Now let's say Magnus Carlsen plays a nothing move. Let's say something stupid like a6, and then the move would be e5, and that's a pawn sacrifice which actually gives a lot of activity to white, and I think white is just better here. So after bishop takes, knight gains a tempo on the queen, knight to e4. After the queen moves, you get knight f6 check, and after bishop takes, knight takes. I think white is clearly better in this position. So that's one example of a very useful pawn sacrifice, and you should remember this pattern. However, this would only work if white had another tempo. So after knight to g4, another option which Magnus Carlsen didn't play was bishop takes g4, and I think this had to be calculated, but after I was going through the lines, I didn't see a clear advantage for black, even though these pawns do look dangerous. So let's say rook takes, yeah, this is why exactly. So if white takes here, then the position is okay. The problem is that after bishop takes g4, white can play rook takes f7, attacking the g7 bishop, and after bishop to e5, take on g4 then, and I think white is better here. So h5 wouldn't work because rook 1 to f5, and black is in a world of pain. You actually have to give up your queen, so this position wasn't good. So after knight to g4, Magnus Carlsen castled, and now Well, you could say that white's king is in more trouble, but that's only because of the pawn structure, and the black king is actually very cozy on the c8 square, and I'm not sure how Caruana was planning to attack it. Now, the knight on g4 is misplaced, and that will actually be the theme of the game. That poor knight that came from g1 to f3 is now stuck on g4. The only available squares it has are h2 and f6. None of them are really that useful, and Caruana actually doesn't want to allow Magnus to capture on g4 and to double his pawns, so he played knight to f6 immediately. And now we have knight to d7, just trying to exchange the pieces, knight to h5, attacking the bishop, bishop to e5, g4, and now f6. And this position is already almost losing for white, and it might not seem that way, but Magnus Carlsen has the bishop pair in this position. He has a much safer king. He has much better minor pieces. The knight on c3 is actually out of the game completely. The knight on h5 doesn't have that much influence either. And, well, the bishop pair. And the pawns, which, of course, you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of this, because any pawn break could harm your king terminally. Okay, so in this position, after g4 and f6, Caruana played b3, trying to solidify his position, perhaps trying to finally remaneuver the knight from c3. Bishop to f7, and now knight to d1. Of course, in this position, taking the pawn here isn't really possible, because black can always sacrifice on g4. So if you take with the knight, knight takes, and bishop takes g4 would be a problem, I guess, but let's check that with an engine. So let's say knight takes f6. Yeah, it actually doesn't work. Let's say rook takes here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just losing. So, okay, taking the pawn doesn't work. So after f6, b3. Bishop to f7, attacking the knight. Now knight to d1, not worried about Carlsen capturing on h5. And now knight to f8 once again. And this now is giving up the pawn, but apparently Magnus Carlsen is a complete genius, and he saw that this pawn could be regained afterwards, and this was actually one of the best moves in the position, knight to f8, which I think I never would have even considered if I was him. And now this is giving up the f6 pawn, but as I said, he's just going to get it back. So knight takes f6, knight to e6, staring at the f4 square, and should the knight get to f4, this would be a monster octopus knight. And now knight to h5. Another possibility from this position was knight to d7, actually, because if rook takes d7 or queen takes d7, then rook takes f7, so that wouldn't work. But the problem is that after knight to d7, bishop to f4 would actually solve all of the issues, and the knight would just have to go back. So after knight to h5, Carlsen did capture. Bishop takes h5, g takes h5, and now knight to f4. And this knight is just marvelous. You have to get rid of it immediately. Bishop takes f4, and of course g takes f4, opening up the g file. And now I think white's king is in a lot of trouble. Apparently, though, after bishop takes h5, g takes h5, knight to f4, bishop takes f4, g takes f4 is a slight error. This was better. Apparently, bishop takes f4 was better. But I think from a human perspective, g takes f4 is just great. So, okay, and here, Fabiano Caruana had a chance to, well, regain equality if he had calculated the exchange sacrifice correctly. In this position, he played rook to g2, which is a mistake, which actually gives black an almost -1 advantage. And in this position, had he taken on f4, and let's say bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, queen takes, rook takes, this position is just equal, and white will have no issues drawing this, or even be slightly better. According to the engines, it's just completely equal. Black will have to give up his h6 pawn, and these two passed pawns are more than enough to compensate for the lost exchange, and the material is just completely equal. In fact, I think that, well, a piece is 3 points plus 2 pawns is 5. same as a rook, but I would always have a miner and 2 pawns, especially if they are passed pawns. And according to the engines, it's equal, but Caruana might have had a chance to win this position. So after g takes f4, he must have considered the exchange sacrifice, and I don't know why he didn't go for that. Instead of that, as I said, rook to g2, and that's a mistake. Rook to g8, rook h to g8, queen to e2, rook takes g2, queen takes g2, queen to e6, of course, threatening now rook to g8, taking the queen, knight to f2, preparing to parry that with knight to g4, rook g8, knight g4, queen to e8, now staring at the defenseless h5 pawn, queen to f3, queen takes h5, and now king to f2. And this position, well, black doesn't really want to give up the bishop, and 2 moves should have been considered. One of them, which Carlsen didn't play, is bishop to d4, which might seem tempting, gaining a tempo on the king and checking the king, but after the king gets to d2 and you have to face c3, then your bishop is actually not defending your pawn, and if the f4 pawn falls, then black is probably going to have to face a lot of checks, perhaps even perpetual checks. So after king to f2, Carlsen actually played the best move, and that's bishop to c7, just putting more defense to your king and still keeping the defense of the f4 pawn. And here, well, I think Caruana missed a chance here. He's actually worse now. He's been worse for a while, and in this position during the live commentary, I think everybody was convinced that Carlsen is just going to convert. Another thing is that by this point, Caruana had 2 minutes on the clock, which is just a disgusting position to be in. This is move 32, and the time control is 100 minutes for 40 moves and then 50 minutes for the next 20 moves. So he had to make 8 more moves with 2 minutes on the clock. Okay, you do have a 30-second increment, but still, this is a critical position, and trying to calculate in time pressure is just bad. Here he played king to e2. I think a much better try was e5. Of course, if bishop takes, then queen takes with check, and white is perhaps even winning. You might even win the rook on g8, so this can't be captured. And I think that this was probably the best move. I think the best move for black is king to b7, and after knight to f6, you are not winning an exchange, but you get a lot of activity, and I think this is just a draw. So yeah, e5 should have been played, and this is the best option for black, and this is perfectly fine for white. However, after king to e2, which is a mistake, this is minus 0.7. This is just winning for black, and Carlsen had about 20 minutes left, so he should have played this position more precisely, as he usually does. He's actually known for converting almost drawn or lost positions, and this should have been a piece of cake for him. Here, queen to g5, preparing h5, knight to h2, pairing h5 in advance, h5, rook to f2, queen to g1, knight to f1, and now h4, which, well, apparently this was the decisive blunder. If you turn on the engine, the best move in this position is queen to g7, and now the move queen to g7 is threatening to transfer the queen to b2, and then to play rook to g3, which is the key move in this position. Let's say in this position knight to d2, which is the best move, and now king to b7, just bring your king to a bit more safety, and after a4, trying to save your pawn. This position is just much better for black, and none of your pieces can move. If you're white, you just can't make any moves. You are basically in Zugzwang with 3 pieces on the board, and okay, you can capture here, but after you capture on h5, then the black queen gets too much activity, and once you allow the rook to come to g3, you are just going to be lost. And this position, you can see the evaluation bar on the right side of the board. This is just losing for white. Apparently, this was the way to go, and well, I have to say I'm sorry Magnus Carlsen didn't find that move. After knight to f1, so instead of queen to g7, he played h4, which might seem like the best option, but this gave Fabiano enough time to, well, to solidify his position. He played king to d2, Another mistake, but once again not used by Magnus. Now the best move here once again was e5. The bishop can't take and it won't work. The best move is rook to e8 and now king to d2. And the thing is that you want to keep attacking the poor c6 pawn, and that's the way to get activity. So yeah, this would have been the way to go for Caruana. But after king to d2 and king to b7, c3, bishop to e5, yeah, okay. C3 was another mistake, and after, in conjunction with king to d2, this actually gave Magnus a clear winning chance. Now in this position, this is move 38, Caruana was still in horrible time trouble with seconds on the clock. He actually came down to 7 seconds at one point. I think it was move 35 or 34. And in this position, Magnus Carlsen had about 5 or 7 minutes on the clock, so not that much time, but since he's a great bullet and blitz player, he should have calculated this. And the move was an exchange sacrifice, which was just brilliant. Now, after c3, which doesn't really do that much, it actually weakens your king, because now taking on a2 is with check, if black ever manages to do that. The move was rook to g3. And, well, you either lose a pawn, and the h4 pawn is going to queen, or you take the exchange. So let's say Caruana takes, which would be the only move. Now knight takes g3, h takes g3. This is completely busted for white. Rook to e2, queen to a1, and you can't defend your pawn. You can't do anything. d4, queen takes a2, rook c1, queen takes b3, and well, you can see that this is just hopeless, and black is going to convert the position. The exchange doesn't matter at all. So after c3, rook to g3 should have been played, and the game would have been ended, especially since Caruana had seconds on the clock, and I think he would have blundered something. Instead of that, after c3, Magnus played bishop to e5, which doesn't really do that much. Okay, it improves your position and it stops d4, but you don't have time to do that. King to c2, queen to g7 in this position, knight to h2, and here, well, in this position Magnus chose a move which actually turned a completely winning position. This is actually move 40, so now they both had enough time on the clock. He actually turned the winning position into a completely drawn position. He played bishop takes c3, which allows Magnus to capture on f4, and after queen takes f4, this is just a draw, apparently. Bishop d4, queen to f7 check. He allowed Caruana to exchange the queens, and okay, black is better here. You can't do that much. I mean, your rook is attacked, you can't move off the second rank because you lose your knight, and you do allow rook to g3, but that's completely irrelevant after knight to g4, because tactically black doesn't really have time to win, and he's going to have to go into a drawn endgame in which everything gets exchanged. And now Carlsen went for that. I'm sure both of them have calculated, because I managed to calculate, and they both had 50 minutes on the clock. So after rook takes h3, e5 is the move, the drawing move, and now if you play rook to g3, you are going to have to play an exchange down. This is a forced variation. e6, rook takes g4, e7, rook g8, e8 queening, and rook takes e8, rook takes e8. This is just a draw, and white can't win this position. The bishop is strong enough and the pawn is strong enough, so this is a draw. And what Carlsen played in the game is rook to f3, which is one tempo faster, but still forcing an exchange in which black is going to be a pawn up in a drawn rook endgame. e6, rook f8, e7, rook to e8. There was another option instead of e7, which might be interesting. That's knight to h6, and after rook e8, knight f7, knight f7, h3, knight to g5, and you're going to lose your pawn. If you're black, you can't do anything. So king b7, knight takes h3, king c7, knight g5, and this would have also been a draw. Black is going to round up this pawn and win it, but it doesn't matter. Instead of that, Caruana went for e7, and we have rook to e8, knight to h6, h3, bishop f5. I'm sorry, knight to f5 and bishop to f6. This is the only move. If you don't play that, then Knight to d6 is coming and you are losing, so bishop to f6 is the only move. a3, Caruana had time to waste the tempo here because you are waiting for the move h2, and that has to happen, so Carlsen is going to have to play h2 and then the pawns will be exchanged. So b4, cb4, ab4, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, h2. Yeah, note one more thing, that in this position after bishop takes, you can't really keep this pin. Of course, if you want to keep the pin, then the pawn is going to queen, so tactically you have to give the piece back. Knight takes e7, h2, rook takes, and this is now 3 versus 2, which is, well, it could be won, especially by Magnus Carlsen, but hardly. I mean, Caruana is 2800 and over, and he could hardly lose this position, and at this point I actually stopped watching the game and I went out because I thought it would be a draw, and I just wasn't that excited anymore. I can't believe that Magnus blundered -3 advantage, -2.7 advantage, and from this position on they maneuvered for a long time, and Magnus Carlsen tried to do something and to find an opportunity, but apparently neither of them have made any mistakes. They just played as super grandmasters that they are, and well, Carlsen didn't get a single chance to win this position, and after about, I don't know, 40 or 50 moves of maneuvering their rooks, they agreed to a draw, and well, there's nothing you can do. Caruana would have to make a mistake for Magnus Carlsen to make any progress, and well, now the position in which they agreed to a draw, I'm just going to get to 1 point here. Yeah, now whatever black does, this is where they agreed to a draw. Whatever black does here, if white manages to cut the king off, which is going to happen, then black just doesn't have any chance of winning, and he can't force the pawns through. If he liquidates another pawn, then this is a simple, very known endgame in which white has no problem holding. So yeah, a draw after all. I have to say, I've expected the draw before the game, because I wasn't sure that Caruana will find enough strength in himself to play an aggressive opening in round 1. And after about 20 moves, I would bet anything that Carlsen is going to win. And when he was -2, -3, I just had no doubt that he was going to win. And I have to congratulate Fabiano Caruana, who managed to hold on to his position with 7 seconds on the clock, and he played 10 or more moves in horrible Zeitnot with 2 minutes on the clock, and he managed to pull it through. And well, I'm not sure who this is better for psychologically, whether Magnus is going to be crushed that he missed such an easy opportunity to gain an advantage early on in the match, or that Caruana is going to be crushed because he played horribly with the white pieces. Let's hope both of them feel well for tomorrow's game, and that we see another exciting game like this. Yeah, I have to say the match is already more exciting than Carlsen-Karyakin in 2016, and I'm sure that they won't go into tie breaks, and I'm happy about that. Okay, everybody, thanks very much for watching. I'm going to be covering all the games, some of them perhaps not immediately after they play. Tomorrow I'm going to a wedding, so I'm not going to be able to record after they finish the game. I'm not even going to be able to watch the whole game live, which I'm sorry about, but still. So anyway, let me know who you think the favorite is in the comments below. Let me know what you think of the game, and stay tuned for more chess. Thanks very much for watching. See you later. Bye bye.